Okay, a couple of months ago I did a video on my first 2 months with the heat pump, and I said at the time that I'd do a follow-up video later on after some cold weather. So this video will look at the 2 months since then, which is December and January. In that period we've had some very cold weather, and I've also got experience of the heat pump with a very, very full house as well, so I can talk through my results from that period. So what I was going to do basically is have a quick look at the temperatures versus the normal and how well the heat pump has worked. Has it kept us warm? What's the coefficient of performance with the colder weather? And take you through some data on what it's cost to run through that period. So the first thing I thought I'd do was look at the weather data for the periods that I'm going to look at the performance of the heat pump over. So this is from a site called Weather Underground. I found it very useful. If you put your postcode in, it'll provide the most local weather station that you can refer to get data from. And in my case, that's Bristol Airport, which is probably only about 15 miles away. So look at December 23 first. And during that month, the average temperature was 7.5 degrees, but the minimum was -5. And again, you can see by dragging the mouse over the different periods right at the beginning of the month, around the 2nd onwards, there was a very cold period where it hit -5, and the average temperature during the day was well below freezing as well. So I'm going to look at a couple of days in that period. The rest of the month, as I say, was reasonably close to average temperatures. The other month I'm going to look at is January 2024. So again, if I look at the average is little under 5 degrees. The minimum was -5 again, and in the case of January we had quite a prolonged cold spell from about the 7th of January onwards, getting very cold around the 17th and 18th, hitting a low of -5 and an average of -1 or 2 degrees. And this is much colder weather than we've had in this area for some years. So again, it allows me to look at the performance of the heat pump in these different months. So just to summarise that, the December weather had an average of 7.5 but a minimum -5. Very cold spell at the start of the month. January average is 4.8 with a minimum of -5, and again a very cold spell in the middle of the month. These cold spells were much colder than anything I've experienced here for quite a while, going down to those sort of temperatures. So just moving on, did the heat pump work? In summary, did the house stay warm? I can honestly say the house has never been more comfortable than it is with the heat pump. It works in a completely different way. It keeps the heat topped up in the house, so you never let the house get particularly cold. And as I say, it results in it being more comfortable. And I also believe it results in you being able to set the thermostat a bit lower, because you don't get cold and then try and warm up again. And the other key point is the heat pump has never run at its full capacity of 100%. So it's showing the heat pump is easily coping with the demand for this house.
So never during that period?
Never, apart from possibly just during startups and things, but never for a prolonged period. So
that's interesting, because your house was set when you put the heat pump at -2 degrees?
-2, yeah.
And you've gone to -5?
-5. Yeah, and in truth, we had cold spells and we had very full house spells, and we haven't had the two together. Okay. But I'm still confident that basically when that combination comes, it can easily cope.
Down to -5?
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying you'd heat every room to 20 degrees all the time, but in terms of how we want to live with the bedrooms heated at certain points of the day and so on and so forth, I'm completely confident we work down to -5.
Which is what most people
would want, yeah. So I think the way they do the heat pump design is very conservative, with very high temperatures throughout the house all the time. In fact, over Christmas I had complaints that the rooms were too warm, so I had to turn the thermostats down. People didn't want their bedrooms as warm as I had them set. So I thought it'd be worthwhile just recapping what my installation is. I do recommend you go back and look at the other video if you haven't seen it. So the house, it's a large house, 5-bedroom house. I have provided extra insulation in many of the core areas, which I've been adding progressively over the last couple of years. The heat pump I have installed is a Valent 7 kilowatt Aerotherm Plus. It's a monoblock heat pump. it is capable of putting out 9 kilowatts of heat at -2, so it's bigger than it actually appears to be. I have no buffer tank, no hydraulic separation, so it's a simple direct system. Very significantly, I have microbore pipes to each of the radiators. I have a 22mm backbone running through the house, but each radiator is then plumbed off that with a 10mm microbore pipe, and I have 28mm pipes running from the heat pump outside to the house. I keep the main living area radiators always on just to make sure that the heat pump has enough flow, as it needs to have a minimum flow at all times. I have an open energy monitoring system which provides very detailed analysis on the performance of the heat pump, and again there is another video which goes into more on that system. In terms of control, I have the Valent sensor comfort control system, and that's in the living area, and that provides weather compensation, etc., and keeps the temperature stable in the living areas of the house. And then I have a Honeywell Evo Home system which allows me to set up schedules for each of the bedrooms and the more peripheral areas, so that works in parallel. Before going into the details of the running costs of the heat pump, I thought I should cover what my energy system is, because it's hard to separate the costs from the whole system I have in place. I will provide details on the number of kilowatt hours used by the heat pump so you can work it out for your own system. But my energy system consists of a 6.3 kilowatt hours peak of solar system with a 5 kilowatt inverter, so I do get significant amounts of solar power, which I'll touch on. I have a Tesla Powerwall home battery which has 30.5 kilowatt hours of storage, and I've set it up to allow export so that I can make money from exports at appropriate times. I have an electric vehicle and a home charger, and that gives me access to the intelligent Octopus Go tariff, which gives 6 hours of low cost electricity at night times, at least 6 hours, sometimes it's more, at 7 pence per kilowatt hour. I will dig into the details of the performance of the heat pump in more details just a bit later in this video, but I think before that it's worth summarising what energy the heat pump used and what it would cost if you didn't have my energy set up. So during December, from the open energy monitoring system, I can see the heat pump used 352 kilowatt hours of electricity to produce nearly 1500 kilowatt hours of heat. In January it was 470 kilowatt hours of electricity for 1650 kilowatt hours of heat. So what would it cost if you didn't have any batteries, solar, etc., and you just use the standard tariff? So this really represents the very worst case, because you would just pay a standard 30 pence per kilowatt hour. So the average for the 2 months, if I assume 400 kilowatt hours for each a month, would be 30 pence would be £120 for the coldest months of the year. So again, I think that's a very competitive cost. There really is no reason for anyone to stay on a standard tariff. Octopus offer heat pump specific tariffs, as I believe other companies do as well. So that really represents the worst case. So what I'll do now is go into some more detail, and later I'll dig into my own bills with my particular setup. Okay, so how has the heat pump performed over the couple of months that I'm looking at? I'll have a quick look at the open energy monitor system, and what I'm looking at here is trying to look at December and January. So if I run it from 1st of December through to the end of January, it's about there, you can see how the heat pump has performed. It's had a coefficient performance of 3.8, and I'll dig into 3 days which will illustrate how it performed on individual days within that period of time. So first thing I'm going to do is look at a couple of cold days. I've got 2 cold days. The first one is the 8th of January. It was a cold day where the average temperature was 0.5, the minimum was -1, and during that day the heat pump used 20 kilowatt hours of electricity to produce 69 kilowatt hours of heat with a coefficient performance of 3.36. So I thought it was useful to illustrate what the heat pump costs for individual days. Taking averages doesn't necessarily give you a full feeling for how it operates. So during that day, we use 11 kilowatt hours of off-peak power, running at night and charging the battery. But because there was no solar or very little solar, the battery wasn't able to sustain the heat pump for the whole day. So I used 8 kilowatt of peak power. So the 8 kilowatts of peak power cost £2.40. The 11 kilowatt hours of off-peak cost 77 pence, and I got 1 kilowatt hour of solar, which was obviously free. So what happened on that day is the heat pump cost me £3.20 to run. So it's, as I say, one of the coldest days of the year. Not much contribution for the solar, but I was able to make use of off-peak power directly during the night, and also have a significant contribution from the battery during the day.
So this is really, you're getting virtually nothing from your battery. So this is what you'd expect almost if you didn't have solar.
That's right. The solar's minimal, and this shows a screenshot of the data for that day, showing you the 20 kilowatt hours and 69 kilowatt hours of heat. So the second day, which was the next day, the 9th of January, an equally cold day, similar average temperatures and minimums, and similar power requirements. So I used 22 kilowatt hours of electricity, produced 74 kilowatt hours of heat, with a COP of 3.28. Of that power, approximately 14 kilowatt hours was daytime use. But on this occasion, I had a very good contribution from solar. So the heat pump cost the 11 kilowatt hours.
So your solar was at 11.4.
11.4, yeah. So during that, I used 11 kilowatt hours of off-peak power to run the heat pump directly, and also to potentially charge the battery. And then I had 11 kilowatt hours of solar, which cost me nothing. So during that day, the total cost of running the heat pump was the 77 pence associated with the off-peak power that I used to run the heat pump.
Fantastic.
So what I'll briefly do is just go back to look at those days in detail. So if I pick the 9th of January as an example, so this shows the heat pump running on the 9th of January. Very cold day, average of about 1 degree or less. And looking at this diagram again, or this chart, this shows the amount of electricity being used. This shows the heat output from the heat pump. Then you've got the external temperature, the internal temperature, the flow rate, and the return rate of the water in the radiators. And what I really wanted to show here is that the heat pump isn't having to work very hard throughout this period. Now, the house was not completely full, so we were only heating the living areas and our bedroom when we needed it. But I know from experience, when the heat pump is running at its maximum, it's about 3 kilowatts of power it takes. And when it's running at the minimum, it's around 600 watts. So you can see throughout this period, it's running the whole time, but around 30 or 40%, with plenty of capacity left to put more heat into the house.
Is there any point where it goes to maximum capacity? That's the highest one there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's probably maximum, and that's during a ramp up, So if it was sustaining a maximum ramp up to that and just keep running at that.
And then what's happening over here? Because that's your radiator temperature's dropping.
Yeah.
And your heat pump isn't on at all.
So what I do is I effectively turn the heating on to a setback temperature from 8:30 at night. So we generally find it's warm enough then. And then it comes back on when the cheap electricity starts.
And that's your room temperature?
That's the room temperature, yeah.
So there's no real drop?
That's right. So when we switch it off, it's 19. By the time we're going to bed, it's half a degree lower, so it's fine.
And by the time the heat pump comes back on again,
yeah,
it's hardly dropped. It's still hardly dropped.
Yeah, it's 18 degrees. I mean, again, this is an extremely cold night. So, and I suppose if you look around to what's happened from the day before, this would be the continuation of the cycle. The first thing I do is do a hot water cycle. So again, the heating isn't on; it's just heating the hot water.
And that's at low rate.
And that's at low rate. And
cheap
then
rate, 7p. Yeah.
That's 7p. And then by the time the heating come back on, it's what's that, 1.5 degrees below what it was. 17.5 degrees versus 19. So then it brings the house back up to the 19 degrees, and it's very cheap to run the heat pump at night. So the cost of running it at this time is negligible. And if I were to just run it with the heating cycle, which is until about 5:30.
This is your nighttime warming the house cycle.
Yeah, so it's 5 kilowatts 5 kilowatt hours at 7 pence, so it's 35 pence to run it for that period. And again, you can see in more detail what it's doing. During the cycle, it is ramping up high at the beginning and then just running low. There's a defrost going on at this point. That's running at about 50%. Then it hits another defrost cycle and so on. But as I say, there's plenty of...
And where's the outside temperature? That's at the bottom. So
That's at the bottom.
you've hit the defrost
0.4.
0.4.
Yeah.
Yeah, cold night.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, and then the final one I thought I'd look at is the 29th of December. So this is 29th of December. So
what's the outside temperature?
the outside temperature is around
7
to between 5 and 7 degrees, something like
Okay.
that. But as I say, the house was very full. All the bedrooms were occupied. We're using a lot of hot water because people were taking baths, etc. And you can see there's 2 hot water cycles. Normally with a 300 litre tank, 1 cycle is more than enough. But I did another cycle during the day. And again, the heat pump is running typically at minimum during these periods to keep the house at the required temperature. And even during the sort of morning periods where you're preheating the bedrooms, it's running at close to minimum. I haven't at this point had the combination of very cold weather and a very full house. But given how low the heat pump is having to run when it's very cold and not fully occupied, and when it's fully occupied but not so cold, I'm confident that the heat pump will cover the case where it is fully occupied and cold. Looked at heat loss from a purely thermodynamic point of view, and the longer your house is warm, the more heat loss you have. But actually, the heat is more subjective than that. If you allow yourself to get cold, you then have to put much more heat in to get to the point where you feel warm again. I was anticipating using significantly more heat with the heat pump, but that has turned out not to be the case, because I think what happens is even though you're heating it for longer, you never feel cold, so you don't have to have these huge boosts in temperature to get yourself feeling warm again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There was also the big boost of heat ending up heating all the fabric
Yeah.
and everything else, whereas if you maintain it,
Yeah.
you don't end up with that
going through that.
singing.
So I thought it would be useful just to look at the total energy I used for the months that I'm investigating. So this is my page from Octopus Energy, and if I hover over December, you can see I used just over 1,000 kilowatt hours of energy, and in January it was just under 1,000 kilowatt hours of energy, and that's energy for the whole house and for my car. So the heat pump is a relatively small part of that. As I mentioned earlier, the figures are around 300 to 400 kilowatt hours of energy going to the heat pump each month. So in terms of my total electricity bill, I thought it'd be useful to go through this. So Octopus bill from the middle of the month to the middle of the month. So my bill to the 15th of January is £120. So it covers half of both the months that I'm looking at in detail. So I think it's reasonably representative of the cost of energy for the month, for both months. So from that £120, I also have some deductions because I earned money. So first of all, I took part in a number of saving sessions, and I'll discuss what those are more a bit later. So I earned nearly £25 and a further nearly £11. I also export a little bit of solar, although most of the solar was used and there wasn't a great deal produced during these months. So from that £120, I reckon my actual bill is around £80 for the one of the coldest months we've had for some time. So if you're prepared to fully engage with the grid and take account of the variable pricing that the grid offers because of strain on the grid, etc., you can save a lot and minimise your bills. Bear in mind that in the summer I'd expect negative bills. I'd expect solar export to more than cover my usage and to earn me some money. So this is the worst time of year for the bills.
Do you know what it was last year for your gas?
I can show you some data on that. Mm-hmm. What I've been doing is I collect all the data on the energy usage from the house, the input from the solar, how much the house uses, how much I get from the grid, how much the heat pump uses, how much you use for charging the car, etc., etc. And the other thing I've done recently is added in the amount of gas in kilowatt hours I used in previous years, so I can actually look back at my total energy use when I had gas and compare it with my total energy use with a heat pump, and I think there's some really fascinating data here. One of the graphs I've produced from this spreadsheet, which I love and shows great results, is this one here, which shows the total energy used in the house over the last 4 winters, including the current winter, which is still in progress. So this covers charging the car, heating the house, cooking, the whole lot. And this is energy consumed. So in the years before I had the heat pump, I used data on the gas, as I showed you earlier on. So you can see back in 2020, I was using nearly 3,500 kilowatt hours of energy per month during the cold months. And this was predominantly driven by heating, of course. And gradually the demand, even before I went to heat pump, fell, and this was through putting in improved insulation in the house. I've progressively been adding basic insulation to the house, and then that takes us to the current winter where I am using a heat pump. So this is energy in. Obviously the heat pump is putting far more heat out than is shown here, but you see these amazing reductions in the total energy used in the house. So I'm using about 1,000 kilowatt hours total energy in the house, compared to 3,500 in 2020 and 2,500 in 2021. So huge reductions in total energy use, which is really fantastic.
So what we're saying is, this is before you insulated, okay, and then this is when you insulated.
I was progressively doing insulation, yeah.
So really, this gives us an idea of the saving you do when you insulate, even with a gas house.
A rough idea, because
Yeah.
obviously I haven't accounted for temperatures and things like that.
And then this one here gives us an idea of gas running in a
Yeah, somewhere
insulated
between
house,
those, yeah,
and it drops to here.
that's right. So 50%, more than a 50% saving from the average when it's insulated running with gas, a 70% saving when it's less well insulated and running with gas.
Because I find that interesting as well, because people always talk about insulation
Yeah.
for heat pumps, but insulation applies to
gas as well.
any heating,
Yeah, it's a very good point.
and
Yeah,
that and you're saving about a third.
that's right. So I have got another graph that shows that. Just go across to that one. So this is just heat input to the house, so not energy. So with the gas, I can work out the heat input by assuming a 90% efficiency for the gas boiler. And for the heat pump, I've got a heat meter which tells me exactly how much heat has gone into the house. So this shows, and what I've shown with this red line is the temperatures. So I haven't tried to do the summer, so just look at the winter temperatures. So this period here, which is the winter of 2020 into 21, and you can see the average temperatures for the different months. Similarly for the next winter, right through to this winter.
Okay, so what we're doing is this is 20. Oh, I see. 21.
It's the winter of 2021,
22,
21, 22,
3, 4.
and we're 23, 24.
Okay.
But I find it quite interesting. Again, you can see this massive amount of energy that was used for the gas in that period. And the average temperature for January was relatively low. What's that? That's 3.8 degrees. I multiply it by 100, so 3.8 degrees. Here it's about 5 degrees. This January it's about 4 degrees. But that doesn't account for that huge spike. So you can see a couple of things here. One is as you say, as I've done more insulation, the total energy need of the house has gone down significantly. But the other thing is it's showing the heat pump is putting in approximately the same amount of heat as the gas was putting in.
Yeah.
I was wondering if the heat pump would, as I said earlier, take more heat because I'm keeping the house warm. But there's no evidence of that. I mean, this January's been colder than last January. So I think that's interesting as well.
Fascinating.
Shall I briefly cover Octopus saving sessions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a very brief overview of the Octopus saving sessions. which I mentioned and which you can get credited for. So what Octopus do, along with a number of other suppliers, is offer the opportunity for people to save energy during periods when the grid is under great pressure because there's a lot of demand and not enough production. So by taking part in these saving sessions, you can get paid very handsomely. Octopus also allow you to export from a battery, which is what I'm doing. So I don't usually consume power in these sessions anyway because I'm running off my own battery. But what I can do is program my battery to export. And I've covered this in some detail for the Tesla Powerwall in another video, which we'll provide a link to in the notes. But just to show you what happens is for the sessions I've taken part in, and I missed the number because I didn't know that I could export from a battery. So 15th of December, I exported 4.52 kilowatt hours, did similar things in several other occasions. And for that, I get paid over £10, £10 or £11. So there's been many more sessions. Unfortunately, I missed them because I didn't know that I could export at that time. But by taking part in these sessions, you can earn enough. And I reckon that during the coldest months of the year, by taking part in all these sessions, I could have paid my complete bill. As I say, look at the other video for more details on how to do this.
So that's really good actually, because it just shows Octopus best use of the grid.
That's right, and I'm also
benefiting
letting the consumer take part, because the big gas peaker plants are making a fortune when these periods of high demand come. And Octopus are effectively allowing individuals to share in some of that pay and reducing the demand on gas.
And I think in one of the previous videos, Octopus indicated that it's the same as putting out one power station.
That's right, the combined contribution of everyone taking part makes a huge difference.
So if you've got more people involved, it might even mean
two power stations, yeah, that's right. So basic conclusions, I'm really pleased with the performance of the heat pump. It's exceeded my expectations throughout this period. In one of the previous videos, projected what the costs might be. I assumed a coefficient performance of 3 for the whole winter. I'm now confident it'll be much nearer 4 for the whole period.
Fantastic.
Microbore pipes are not impacting the performance in any way, as far as I can see. You know, I'm meeting the specifications for the heat pump.
The other thing I would say, as somebody who comes into your house regularly, is it's much more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, it's always warm.
Yes.
So it's not only just the cost.
Yeah.
It's the overall comfort.
Yes, very good point. And I put that in the beginning, but that is definitely one of the conclusions as well. It's a much more pleasant experience with a heat pump, with, you know, keeping the temperature at the right level rather than big spikes and troughs in the heat. The final thing is the heat pump has easily coped with the conditions this winter. I'm completely confident that the 7 kilowatt heat pump, which can put out 9 kilowatts, is plenty for this house.
And when you went to install the heat pump with your installer, did they say 7? Or were they trying to give you a higher one?
They would, yes. I mean, they started off trying to give me 12 kilowatts. And again, I think that was covered in the previous video, which, given the cycling I'm getting with the 7 kilowatts, would have been a very poor choice for me. The 12 kilowatts requires a higher flow rate and has a minimum power output as well, which means that, you know, in the slightly warmer conditions, it would really struggle to cut back its output to what I need.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Fascinating.